Have you ever worked on something for so long that the silence started to feel like proof you were failing? You kept showing up day after day, giving your time, your care, and your hope to a project or a dream that refused to show even a flicker of life. After a while, the hardest part is not the work itself. The hardest part is continuing when your own eyes keep telling you that nothing is happening. There was once a village surrounded by dry, cracked earth. The fields had not given anything in years. No wheat, no corn, not even a weed. The wells were low, the wind carried a constant grit of dust through the streets, and people no longer spoke about planting. They spoke only about leaving. Some said the soil was dead. Others said the rain had simply forgotten them. Because everyone could see the same empty ground, everyone believed the same story, that nothing would ever grow there again. In that village lived a man named Orin. Orin had been blind since birth. He had never seen a sunrise or the color of the sky, but he knew the world in ways the others had forgotten. He knew the sound of the morning before the birds began their songs. He knew the specific weight of a full bucket, the roughness of old rope, and the smell of the earth after the smallest, lightest rain. He didn't need sight to know the ground was waiting. One spring morning, Orin walked behind his small house with an old wooden-handled shovel in his hand. There, where the ground was split and gray, he knelt and pressed both hands into the soil. The villagers watched him from a distance, and at first they said nothing. Then someone laughed softly. They whispered about the foolishness of a blind man planting a garden in soil that had been barren for years. A few neighbors tried to be kind, telling Orin that even those who could see the land had given up on it. Orin didn't argue with them. He only kept his palm against the dirt and suggested that perhaps the land wasn't dead, but only tired. The villagers looked at the same dry crust Orin was touching and saw a final ending. To them, the lack of a visible harvest was the only evidence that mattered. They were making a decision based entirely on the surface, assuming that because they could see no life, the potential for it had vanished. Orin began to dig. He could not make straight rows or shape the garden the way other farmers once had, so he worked entirely by touch. He felt the ground with his fingers, searching for the rare places where the soil gave way instead of breaking apart like stone. What another man might have done in an hour took Orin the whole day. He didn't compare himself to others. He only knew the rhythm of his own hands. By sunset, he had prepared one small patch of ground, uneven and crooked, but it was a beginning. The next morning, he planted his seeds. Every day after, before the village woke, Orin walked to the well. He counted his steps, touched the old fence, and found the smooth stone near the bend. He filled his wooden bucket and carried it back slowly, careful not to spill a drop. He spent his mornings tilting the water precisely where his fingers felt the most heat in the soil. He pulled weeds by touch, learning the difference between the rough grip of a weed and the soft weakness of a young stem. The days passed. Still, nothing rose. Then weeks passed, and the ground remained as bare as the day he started. From their windows, the villagers watched him kneeling in the dirt. They shook their heads and whispered that he was delusional. They felt a sense of pity for him, convinced that he was the only person in the village who couldn't see that his hard work was yielding absolutely nothing. One afternoon, Sela came to visit him. She sat beside him on the porch while the evening wind moved through the dry grass. She spoke out of a sense of concern, telling Orin that she looked at his garden every day and saw nothing. She suggested that it might be time for him to stop, to save his energy, and to accept that nothing was going to grow in the empty ground. Orin asked her how the ground looked now compared to the day he began. Sela turned toward the garden and really looked. The patch was still empty. There were no leaves or flowers, but the soil was different. The hard gray crust was gone. The earth looked darker now, softer and more hydrated. It was clear that the ground had been transformed by his constant care, even if it had no green shoots to show for it yet. Orin told her that growth is often invisible long before it becomes obvious. The transformation of the soil was the first sign of progress, a necessary change in the environment before any life could break the surface. true growth changes the foundation of a thing long before it ever produces an external, visible result. That night, the rain finally came, but it wasn't the gentle mist the village needed. It was a violent storm. The wind bent the dry grass low, and water rushed through the narrow paths between the houses, turning the dust into thick, flowing mud. Behind Orin's house, the loose, softened soil he had worked for weeks began to wash away. The storm threatened to unearth every seed he had carefully buried in the dark. Orin woke to the sound of the rushing water. He didn't stay inside where it was dry. He went out into the downpour and knelt in the mud. He moved through the dark with his hands in front of him, gathering stones and handfuls of wet earth. He began pressing mud into low walls around the garden to divert the flow. The rain broke them, and he built them again. He followed the sound of the water, building barriers wherever he felt the ground giving way. From their windows, a few villagers saw his small lantern flickering in the darkness. They saw a man on his knees, his hands caked in mud, fighting a losing battle against the rain. To them, it looked like sheer madness, a man risking his health to protect a garden that hadn't even begun to grow. By morning, the rain had passed, leaving the village silent and dripping. Selah found Orin sitting beside the garden, his clothes soaked and his face pale with exhaustion. Around the patch of earth were small, broken walls of mud and stone. Some of the soil had been carried away, and he knew that some of his seeds were likely lost to the flood. When Selah asked why he had stayed out all night, Orin touched the wet earth. He told her he stayed because he could not see what was lost, so he chose to protect what might still be alive. He sat there guarding the few patches he had managed to shield, acting on the conviction that the potential beneath the surface was worth a night of exhaustion. After the storm, Orin returned to his work, slower but persistent. Then, one morning, his fingers found something different, a small bend in the soil and a thin stem, soft as a whisper. He froze, leaning closer to touch it gently. It was a green shoot, finally breaking through the earth. Soon there was another, and then another. When Selah came running to tell him the news, Orin was already kneeling in the dirt, smiling. She was breathless, shouting that they were finally growing. Orin simply nodded. He had already felt the life pushing upward toward a sun he had never seen. The garden was finally beginning to reflect the months of invisible work he had poured into it. Word spread, and the villagers gathered to see the garden. It wasn't a perfect or grand sight. The rows were crooked and some spots were still empty. But it was alive, in soil everyone had called dead. An old farmer named Tobias stood there longer than the others. He looked at the small, uneven garden and felt the ache of a man who realized he had stopped his own work too soon. Tobias asked how Orin had grown what the rest of them could not. Orin explained that the villagers had trusted only what they could see, the dry earth and the cracks. Because they saw emptiness, they believed the land was dead. Orin, unable to see the cracks, had to listen to the ground differently. It told him it was tired and abandoned, but not dead. The village had spent years looking at the surface and drawing a final conclusion. Orin's garden proved that the environment wasn't the problem. The problem was the decision to walk away from it. The land was ready to grow. It just needed someone who wouldn't give up when the results remained hidden. In the years that followed, the village changed. Tobias and others brought out their old, dull tools and began clearing patches of their own. The land was still difficult, but there were now pockets of green where there had once been only dust. It all started with one crooked, uneven garden that proved the ground had never been the enemy. Perhaps there is a part of your life right now that looks like that dry earth. Maybe it is your work, a dream you've been chasing, or a process of personal healing. You have put in the time and the effort, yet you're still staring at a bare surface. It is easy to assume that silence means failure, but the absence of a visible result is not proof that nothing is happening. Beneath the surface, the soil is changing. The foundation is being prepared. The growth is occurring in the dark, where it cannot yet be seen or judged by others. Do one small thing for your garden today. Send the message, practice the skill, or simply show up one more time. You don't need to see the harvest to know the work is worth doing. Give your progress the patience it requires, because the first green shoot might be much closer than you think.